Perhaps, witness, you can describe this lazarette to the tribunal. This was part of a square which was closed in with a wooden fence. All women, aged persons, and sick children were driven there. At the gates of this lazarette there was a large red cross flag. Men's, who specialized in the murder of all persons brought to this lazarette, would not let anybody else do this job. Here is just one example of what was the fate of the children there. A 10-year-old girl was brought to this building from the train with her 2-year-old sister. When the elder girl saw that Men's had taken out a revolver to shoot her 2-year-old sister, she threw herself upon him, crying out and asking why he wanted to kill her. He did not kill the little sister. He threw her alive into the oven and then killed the elder sister. Rosman likely meant to say he did not shoot the little sister. He threw her alive into the oven and then shot the elder sister. Also, in the established Treblinka story, the lazarette has a fire pit, not an oven. Consider that Raoul Hilberg doesn't mention children being thrown alive into fires in his 3-volume The Destruction of the European Jews, and neither does the Auschwitz entry at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. In other words, even Holocaust historians don't believe that happened. Considering that, notice how the lawyers supposedly representing the Germans always waive their right to cross-examine these alleged witnesses. A good lawyer could have exposed all the lies I've pointed out. Yet here's an example of what I've always found when I've read the transcript. The witness accusing the Germans of killing babies by throwing them alive into a fire finishes testifying, and the president asks, "Do any of the defendants' counsel wish to ask any questions?" There was no response. And the judge continues, "Then the witness can retire." At the end of Rosman's article in the U.S. House of Representatives document, he mentions how many people were killed at Treblinka. First, take note that in Raoul Hilberg's book, The Destruction of the European Jews, Hilberg estimates the number killed at Treblinka as up to 750,000. Samuel Rosman, however, has a much higher number. The number of Jews were, from Germany about 120,000, from Austria 40,000, from Poland 1.5 million, from Czechoslovakia 100,000, from Bulgaria 14,000, from Russia 1 million, total 2,774,000. Someone is off by 2 million, either Raoul Hilberg or Samuel Rosman, but this, and the pumping air out of the chamber, and suffocating in a cattle car, and 800 people per bedroom-sized chamber, doesn't keep Hilberg from using Rosman's article as a source. Hilberg writes in his book, The Destruction of the European Jews, that when Jews arrived at Treblinka, some suffered nervous shock, laughing and crying alternately. And the little 61 here on page 972 is the source. It is Rosman's article that we've been looking at. Hilberg's modus operandi seems to be this: if you can find a believable paragraph in an otherwise fraudulent article, use it. There was one other person who made substantial comments about Treblinka at the Nuremberg trial. He was the head of the Auschwitz concentration camp. His name was Rudolf Höss. His testimony was of course mainly about Auschwitz, but he said some things about Treblinka as well. When he testified, there were 2 people in the courtroom with similar names, Rudolf Höss and a Rudolf Hess. Both names have multiple spellings. Let's clarify for a moment who each one is. Rudolf Hess was at one time the second in command in Nazi Germany, just under Adolf Hitler. Rudolf Höss is the one we are looking at, though. He was the camp commander of Auschwitz. While at the prison in Nuremberg, Höss signed a confession, and when he was on the witness stand, his confession was read to him by American Assistant Prosecutor Colonel John Amon. Amon was a prosecutor, but he had another position at Nuremberg as well. He was the head of interrogations. So picture this moment at the Nuremberg trial. Höss is on the witness stand listening to the head of interrogations, Colonel Amon, read his own confession to him. Colonel Amon says, "I commanded Auschwitz until 1st of December 1943 and estimate that at least 2,500,000 victims were executed and exterminated there by gassing and burning, and at least another 500,000 succumbed to starvation and disease, making a total dead of about 3 million. Colonel Amon reads some more of the confession and then says, "That is all true, witness?" "Yes, it is." The problem is that if we go to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum website and look up Auschwitz, it states, "It is estimated that the SS and police deported at a minimum 1.3 million people to Auschwitz complex between 1940 and 1945. Of these, the camp authorities murdered 1.1 million. And when they say murdered, they are including the disease and starvation deaths. So the Auschwitz Museum website says 1.1 million were killed, and yet Hus confessed to 3 million. Strange that he would do that, isn't it? For the next passage in the Nuremberg transcript, we need to know what the term general government here means. It was an area of Poland occupied by Germany. We look at what Hus said about Treblinka. Colonel Amon continues reading the confession. The final solution of the Jewish question meant the complete extermination of all Jews in Europe. I was ordered to establish extermination facilities at Auschwitz in June 1941. At that time, there were already in the general government 3 other extermination camps, Belzec, Treblinka, and Wolzek. Wolzek, a city that doesn't exist. He puts it in the place of Sobibor. The interrogators didn't know enough about the subject to call him on it. Notice that Hus says that in June 1941, there were already in the general government 3 other extermination camps. But if we look at Yitzhak Arad's book, we see that they hadn't even started building any of the camps at that time. On page 24, we read when they began the first camp, Belzec. The construction of the death camp began on November 1st, 1941. You can pause the video and look at them side by side. Then the confession states, "I visited Treblinka to find out how they carried out their exterminations. The camp commandant at Treblinka told me that he had liquidated 80,000 in the course of 1/2 year. He was principally concerned with liquidating all the Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto. He used monoxide gas, and I did not think that his methods were very efficient. So when I set up the extermination building at Auschwitz, I used Cyclone B, which was a crystallized prussic acid, which we dropped into the death chamber from a small opening. Another improvement we made over Treblinka was that we built our gas chamber to accommodate 2,000 people at one time, whereas at Treblinka their 10 chambers only accommodated 200 people each. But that's like saying this. The Treblinka people didn't seem to have their thinking caps on when they combined millions of deaths and bedroom-sized chambers, so I put big chambers." The confession later says, "Still another improvement we made over Treblinka was that at Treblinka the victims almost always knew they were going to be exterminated, and at Auschwitz we endeavored to fool the victims into thinking that they were going to go through a delousing process. Not only is that not true according to the established story, but it's like saying this. Treblinka would never believe this. But people are way more willing to step into what they think is a shower as opposed to what they think is a gas chamber." And that's all that Hus said about Treblinka. So we've seen what was said about nearly 1/3 of the Holocaust at Nuremberg. Not much. Around 20 minutes were spent, and here's a breakdown of that. That it was only 20 minutes is shocking enough, but even more shocking is how many lies were packed into that 20 minutes. We read what Professor Mark Dolinger said again, and we see that for around 1/3 of the Holocaust at least, what he says isn't true at all. This is the most detailed chronology we have of the Nazi atrocities, tens of thousands of pages of personal history. It's a very complete picture of the most horrific moment in modern Jewish history.